Sprout Day here on the Exam Room podcast. For the very first time, we've done 450 some odd episodes, but not once have we done an entire episode dedicated to sprouts. But that ends today, and we have the Sprout Guru himself in the house. He is a longtime raw vegan. He is a serial entrepreneur, and he is the author of the national best-selling book, The Sprout Book. With that, we welcome the one, the only, Mr. Doug Evans to the Exam Room. So good to see you, Doug. Thanks for making the time, my friend.
Hey, my pleasure, Chuck. Thank you so much for having me. I love the work of PCRM, and I love your podcast. So it's an honor to be here.
Man, the honor is all mine because so often I've got Will Bulsiewicz on the show, and inevitably every time he's on, he starts talking about you and he starts talking about sprouts. And he's like, these are some of the healthiest things that we could possibly put into our bodies. So as the sprout guru, Doug, tell us about sprouts, why they are so healthy.
So Chuck, I feel like I'm preaching to the choir, and that's a good place for me to preach. So sprouts are vegetables. So if we just can establish that, that was probably the biggest revelation that I had. Was initially, for most of my life, I thought of sprouts as a garnish and as a side dish and something that people would have with something. And then when I moved to the desert, and I realized I'm living in the Mojave Desert at Wonder Valley Hot Springs, I realized I was also in a food desert, and I no longer had access to organic markets, health food stores, plant-based restaurants. It was up to me in order to live healthy. And food desert, for those of you who don't know, are places where they don't have access to those aforementioned items. And being in the food desert, I was for the first time experiencing an existential crisis with food. Like, how was I going to get my food? Where was the nutrition going to come from? And while soaking in the hot springs, looking at the stars in the galaxy, I received this download. And I'm not very religious or spiritual, but I received this download, which was the answer to my question, which basically we already know, like everything we already know. So I already knew about sprouting. I'd been sprouting for 25 years, but I never thought that sprouts were the answer. I always thought of them as a side dish. And the download came in three parts. Number one, sprouts were vegetables, AKA food. Like, I can now look at sprouts not as little portions, but larger portions, and they could be a food source. Number two, sprouts were vitamins and minerals. So we have a world that's taking supplements, synthetic, added protein powders, and the like, when in fact, sprouts contained every single micronutrient, phytonutrient, polyphenol, bioflavonoid, antioxidant, prebiotic, all the amino acids to form complete protein, so all the essential amino acids, and soluble and insoluble fiber. So it was really powerful to think about sprouts in that way. And then the third were that sprouts were medicine, that there were thousands of peer-reviewed published papers of the chemoprotective properties, how cruciferous vegetables, and in particular broccoli sprouts, could kill cancer cells, how they could detoxify benzene from the lungs, how they could help regulate insulin levels in diabetics, how, and similar to your journey, Chuck, how they could facilitate and assist with weight loss, because sprouts are very, very high in fiber and low in calorie and low in fat and high in phytonutrients. So that's what got me most excited about sprouts.
I mean, well, there's a lot to get excited about there. It's funny. I think that when we on the show talk often about anti-cancer foods and antioxidants, we think about fruit, blueberries and strawberries and things like that. When you're talking about the power of the sprout, how does it compare to something like a blueberry or a strawberry, which I know our friend Dr. Christy Funk loves to talk about?
Look, I think berries are very healthy foods. And so my diet is mostly sprouts and fruit. So I do very low fat. I'm very aligned with the PCRM, low, no added salt, oil, or sugar. So it would really be a case by case basis. But sprouts are very high in um, flavonoids, and they're high in individual um, antioxidants and carotenoids, and it's depending on which sprout in which quantity, um, and actually where they are in the evolutionary cycle. So as sprouts get more mature and you let them green, they go through photosynthesis and they start to form more chlorophyll. So I think the benefit from the sprouts in many cases are that they are low sugar, and they're low glucose and fructose, and they're high in soluble and insoluble fiber along with the antioxidants. So it would be a good experiment to do some research, and I'm sure you could put a chart in, but I would have to go deep into it because my whole world is sprouts. And if someone gives me a berry, which are very rare to find berries here in the desert, we do have a mulberry tree. But if I get berries, organic berries, I will eat them for sure.
I'm curious. There's also been a lot of guests on the show who have been going through cancer treatments, and that is when they shift over themselves to a plant-based diet. And the stories that I hear from these individuals, Doug, they're mind-blowing, man. I mean, you talk about people who have these chemo groups where they all go in at the same time every week to receive their treatment. They're all in the same room together. And while this individual who has changed up their diet goes through the treatment, they're noticing that they're not having the symptoms that others in the room are having who have brought pizza or hamburgers or something like that into the room. You think that incorporating sprouts for an individual like that, that sounds like that would be a pretty healthy idea as well.
I mean, here's the thing. Um, I want to be very careful not to tell people not to go through their traditional cancer treatment patient, because there are protocols and there are oncologists that specialize in this. Um, I think there's also, I've read several books. I don't know if you've had Chris Wark on from Chris Beat Cancer, or Kelly Turner, who wrote the book Radical Remissions. But in Radical Remissions, they talk about people that have radical remission from cancer. And some of the people are doing, the standard protocols, radiation, chemotherapy, and surgery. And some people don't want to do those other protocols, and they kind of drop back out of the system, and they go into remission. In the case of Chris Wark, he had surgery, but then didn't want to do radiation and chemotherapy. And instead, he went deep into raw plant-based diet, juicing, vegetables, fruit, and he's had no trace of cancer since. So I think that the natural occurring nutrients and energy of plants, and in particular raw and living plants, actually help build the immune system and can have extraordinarily properties to help someone, whether they are taking a traditional treatment path or they're doing an alternative path.
All right. I want to ask you about the microbiome here. That's something that Will Bolsowitz, Dr. Will Bolsowitz, also obviously talks a lot about here on the show. And obviously, huge fan of sprouting there. In terms of health for building that quote unquote good gut bacteria, how much help can a sprout be for someone who's really looking to get their gut health back on track?
I mean, great question, Chuck. So if you think about it, you have 5 pounds of microbiota in the stomach, and you want to have a lot of diversity of fiber, and there's a lot of different sprouts that you can have. Sprouts are a natural prebiotic due to the insoluble fiber that are within the sprouts. The interesting thing in particular about gut health is if you think about like alfalfa sprouts are the early stage of alfalfa hay. So alfalfa hay would be totally indigestible cellulose, right? You're not a horse or a cow, but the alfalfa sprout is young and tender and bioavailable, and therefore, as a prebiotic, it's very easily assimilated and absorbed. And that's the same for every type of sprout, young, tender, water based, and this is a true living food. So rarely are people eating truly raw living foods where, I'm all for eating market stage vegetables, whether it's cauliflower or broccoli. But imagine when you're eating broccoli sprouts, you are not cut off from the entire plant mechanism. With the sprout, you get the root, the shoot, the endosperm, the embryo, the testa. It is a complete living organism that you get to consume intact. And because it's alive, it's still growing. And there's a whole level of, nature and life force that's within there. And as soon as you cook it, as soon as you heat it, as soon as you process it, something changes and it just becomes bland. And I think, the difference between looking at like a raw piece of spinach versus, cooked spinach, how it wilts because the water molecules are being released. With sprouts versus the tender young vegetables, they're even stronger in that potential.
I can hear some of the exam roomies. That's what I call the audience. I can hear some of the exam roomies wondering right now. Well, how different is the nutrient profile of, say, a broccoli sprout compared to a more mature, full-blown, broccoli floret? Does the sprout itself pack more of a nutrient punch, or just speaking generally, or, is there just a completely different nutrient profile once it matures?
I think that the sprout itself definitely packs more in a concentrated area. And if you're talking about the specific healing properties and the compounds, the sprouts are isothiocyanates, and that there is a finite amount of certain compounds that are within each seed. And as the seed turns into a sprout and a microgreen and then grows into the mature vegetable, those compounds are actually being diluted. Therefore, broccoli sprouts may have 20 to 100 times the concentration of these certain phytonutrients than the mature vegetable.
Is the broccoli sprout the king of all sprouts? Is that the number one most nutrient dense, healthiest sprout in your opinion? Or what are some others that the roomies might want to explore?
Well, it's interesting. Every sprout is a powerhouse, in my opinion, right? So if you think about seeds, seeds are complete plant organisms that are living in a dormant state. And as the plant sprouts and it germinates, it's going through a metabolic shift, and you're lessening the amount of lectins and phytic acid and trypsins, and you're creating new soluble and insoluble fiber as it's growing. So if you're able to look at the fact that you have this complete living organism that's able to grow from a seed to a mature sprout in as little as 7 days or as much as 7 days, and this is doing it without sunshine, without fertilizer, without pesticides or insecticides. This is very powerful life force energy that you get to consume, and you can do it with, literally the organic seeds and a jar, and they sprout there.
Yeah, okay, so you just hit on something that I think is critically important, because the picture that you just painted is that literally anyone, anywhere, at any time can basically do their own sprouting. Would I be correct in that?
Yeah, I mean, sprouting in the US, where it's this amalgamation of capitalism and processed food and animal products, um, sprouting is not that popular. In countries like Japan, China, um, Korea, India, sprouting is extremely popular and has existed from the beginning of time. And so to sprout, you really just need seeds and water, and they sequester carbon and oxygen from the environment, and then they just grow. And I posted this on my Instagram where I've taken 2 tablespoons of broccoli seeds and made 6 cups of broccoli sprouts in 5 days.
Whoa. That's a lot of broccoli sprouts, and that's an abundance of food. How much? It sounds like this is not going to be cost prohibitive at all. Like this is something that even someone who has limited means should be able to do pretty quickly, pretty affordably.
I mean, this to me, and I did a podcast with presidential candidate Marianne Williamson, and uh, after in 2021, and we talked about sprouts being the answer to food equality, food justice, food scarcity, because seeds are so inexpensive and the equipment to sprout is so readily available. It was one of the reasons why I wrote the Sprout book, because I couldn't believe that more people didn't know this valuable information.
I mean, to be honest with you, it doesn't get talked about enough in the mainstream. I will say, like, and I don't know anything, Doug, much about sprouting, but I do remember growing up, even as an overweight guy, and just loving a sandwich that had fresh sprouts and a sliced tomato on top of it. And other than a peanut butter and jelly, could pretty much have been any sandwich under the sun. And I really enjoyed it. It just had kind of this nutty, earthy taste to it, man, that it sent my taste buds into overdrive and had my tummy doing backflips in the best way.
Yeah, I mean, sprouts are really powerful. And if you're trained and you're not addicted to the added salt, oil, sugar, and your dose response isn't going ballistic, I can easily, with my eyes closed, identify every single sprout: alfalfa, radish, clover, broccoli, chia, lentils, various peas, fenugreek. Um, you could tell the difference almost instantaneously. And when I grew up, there was red delicious apples. Maybe if you went to a farm stand upstate New York, you might see a Macintosh apple. And if you wanted lettuce, it was iceberg lettuce. And now there's dozens of varieties of apples readily available everywhere. And there's dozens of variety of tender little leafy greens, pre-washed and bagged and put in clamshells and made available. And my hallucination is that sprouts are going to become as ubiquitous as bagged salads and things like coconut water was something you only got in the tropics. And now coconut water is sold wherever Coca-Cola is sold. And I think that when people become aware of sprouts, everyone is going to be sprouting.
Let's talk about this. What if somebody's hearing this right now? They're like, I'm pushing all my chips to the middle of the table. I'm going all in on the sprouts. What should they be buying right away to get going? You mentioned a jar earlier and seeds. Literally, is that it?
Well, I would say, it's pretty simple to start with a jar, a lid, a stand, a drip tray, and some organic seeds. I wrote the book because there was so many different varieties and so much nuance with different types of seeds that I created my little captain's log. And the book was the lessons and learning from my sprouting journey that I wanted to share with the world, along with interviews with plant-based doctors like Dr. Joel Furman, Dr. Joel Kahn, Dr. Alan Goldhammer, Dr. Michael Greger, and then just to test the waters, I reached out to some non-plant based doctors, Dr. Josh Axe, who wrote the keto book, and Dr. Mark Hyman, who's, you know, likes plants but also likes non-plants, and a bunch of others. And what all these people had in common is they all loved sprouts. They all loved sprouts, but that was not their thing. It just fit into their things.
All right, you rattled off a whole bunch of different kinds of sprouts. I'm wondering, like, off the top of your head, if you can give us a ballpark of how many different varieties of sprouts there are.
Well, if you think about it, Chuck, every single plant has a seed, and every seed needs to germinate and sprout. So if you think about it, you could sprout watermelon seeds, pumpkin seeds, squash seeds, chia seeds, flax seeds, um, every plant in the garden, all the things you're familiar with, the radish, the clover, the, and if you just think about radish, we've got China rose radish, we've got daikon radish, we've got garden stage radish. So every one of these, so I would say there's probably thousands, if not tens of thousands of types of seeds that could be sprouted and turned into food.
And how many do you think you've tasted yourself?
Probably under 100,
Oh, wow.
realistically, under 100,
Okay.
which is probably 99 more than most people.
No doubt. No doubt about it. Here's a question for you. You've eaten, I mean, sprouts from all over the place. Those 99 or so that you've had, but how do the sprouts that you grow at home, how does the taste compare to the sprouts that are store bought? Because obviously there's a huge difference when you're talking about any other kind of produce. I'm assuming it's kind of the same for a sprout.
I would say what makes sprouting at home so powerful and so unique is that you can grow a fresh harvest every time and there's no transportation required. So, like anything else, if you're getting the sprouts in a grocery store and you're getting them when they were just dropped off, they're fresh. But I think in general, I trust store bought sprouts when available, when I'm traveling. And it's normally short trips when I'm traveling. If I'm going somewhere for any sort of extended period of time, I'll bring seeds and I'll sprout on my own there. But on short trips, I go to the store and I've got my sniff test of them, I've got my visual test of them, and then I have my taste test, of the sprouts. And in general, I've been very happy with store-bought sprouts. The difference is when you're buying sprouts in the store, it's going to be about 10 times more money than when you sprout at home. Like literally, if you're sprouting at home, you can make a cup of sprouts for about 10 cents. And if you're buying a cup of sprouts, it might be 2 or 3 or 4 dollars.
Oh, at least I've seen sprouts go for like 8 or 9, to be honest with you. But man, so you've got the visual test, you've got the sniff test, you've got the taste test. I mean, you're like a sprout sommelier, aren't you?
I mean, look, someone's got to do it, right? Someone's got to do it. And, I love sprouts. And I could tell you, once I discovered sprouts and I was in the food desert there, I started to eat sprouts and I was eating sprouts just exclusively for 30 days out of desperation because I had no other food to eat. So I was just eating the sprouts.
Satiated? I mean, you mentioned that there's quite a bit of fiber in there, so I would imagine it filled you up. It did the job.
Oh my God. I mean, basically, I don't know what your diet is, Chuck. Are you 80-10-10? Are you 50-50? What's your diet like?
I mean, my diet is exclusively plant-based, not raw to the extent of you, though I do really love to load up on salads. There's lots of beans, greens, some roasted vegetables in there. Little bit of this, little bit of that. Definitely more toward the SOS free side of things. So I try to stay pretty healthy, but I'm fired up to get some more sprouts in there for sure.
Yeah, I think sprouts are the missing link. Like I love the work of Caldwell Esselstyn and Colin Campbell. Um, and McDougall. And my take on this is very similar to theirs, except I replace a lot of the starches with either fruit or with sprouts.
Okay. Okay. I like that, man. With either fruit or with sprout. Now, if somebody were to marry a sprout with fruit, how would they go about doing that? What might you recommend there? Because before this interview got started, we'll peel back the curtain, you are enjoying some nice fresh watermelon. Can you pair the watermelon with a sprout?
I would say the garden variety sprouts you could have, like the alfalfa, the clover, the broccoli. You could pair it because they're just young and tender and they go really well with it. I think those sprouts, the garden variety sprouts, can be eaten with anything or by themselves.
So, what are some of your other favorite sprout recipes? If you're bringing people over to the house, you're having a big dinner, and you want to showcase these sprouts, what's something that you might be putting on the table?
If you look at my Instagram, which kind of wild, um, we've had millions and millions of views of various recipes that are sprout based. The easiest thing is to replace salad greens with sprouts and then use nori seaweed as a wrap and then use something like tahini paste uh, for the dressing.
Bro, bro, I'm going to book a plane ticket. I'm going to invite myself over to dinner and let's get it done because that sounds amazing, Doug. That really does.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that you're getting it all in sprouts and like to me, I have a friend, Mike Posner, who went out to eat the other day in a restaurant and he brought his own sprouts.
That's awesome.
So he just brought his own sprouts and said, "Hey, I'm on a special diet. Do you mind if I eat?" And he tips as if he bought something there, but he just brought his own food. And which is actually even more audacious than me, because what I'll do is I'll eat before I go there or I'll eat after. And he just like, didn't care. He said, "I'm going to eat with you, but I'm going to bring my own food." And, we have like a philosophy that everything we put in our mouth is in fact a life or death decision. And we want to be eating the highest quality, nutrient dense foods on the planet.
Man, you know what? It's funny. I share in that philosophy 1000% as well. It is very much a life and death decision. And I think back to what my diet used to be 10,000 calories a day of pure evil, man. And then I am very careful for that reason with what I put into my body because I feel like I got a lifetime's worth of garbage in a 27-year span and I don't have any more room for any more of that stuff. Like I'm at capacity. And the more that I learn about nutrition and the importance of diet, the more important it becomes to me to make sure that I stay on that straight and narrow because what started off, Doug, is just a weight loss journey. I mean, now is about keeping Alzheimer's at bay, heart disease, cancer, diabetes, all of those things at bay, all of these diseases that just plague so many of us around the world now. And then getting the opportunity also to speak with experts in the field and doctors who say, like, look, a lot of times these chronic illnesses, 80% of them are preventable. So when you say that it's a life and death decision, man, I could not possibly agree with you anymore.
Yeah, look, I think the fact that, there are always excuses about, eating plant-based and that was expensive and inaccessible. And I think what sprouts do is it opens up the world to ubiquitous access of eating plants, no excuses, no compromises. And it's the best. It's the best. And I actually, when I eat sprouts, they act for me, they boost my mood and they give me the energy to live my best life.
Absolutely, man. A couple more before I let you go. Number one, it took a lot for me to make that change and change my diet. Like I really was at that point staring down the barrel of death at 420 pounds and only being 5 feet 5 inches tall. Like you talk about having chest pains in your early to mid 20s. I mean, that's quite the wake up call. And it still took me a couple more years beyond that to make changes. But that's a pretty extreme case. How would somebody who's just eating that standard American diet and has been getting, a little sicker by the day for decades at that point, how do you get them to really change their mindset and start eating healthier, a healthier diet that includes sprouts and leave all of that fast food, all of that junk food behind them?
I mean, that's a big question, Chuck. What I could tell you is sprouts taste good. People like freshness. You could taste the freshness and just, like I'm looking forward to the day where I'm just going to go around, and hand out sprouts to people and, give them like, I wrote the whole sprout book, but even give out like little sprouting, short guides, maybe a little sample seeds just to get people going. And I think at the end of the day, we are combating the 5,000 food engineers working out of these, dark rooms and labs in New Jersey and Wisconsin, trying to engineer um, added salt, oil, fat, preservatives, MSG, um, you know, artificial coloring, just to make the food increasingly more addictive. And I think that if someone understands that they are being played and that they just need to be present, slow down, and choose what they want to eat that's going to serve them, more and more people will start, eating sprouts and being healthy. I think it's really hard if someone's like thinking they're going to go to a Super Bowl party, and eat the wings or the arms, of 16 different chickens with barbecue sauce on, and they're like focused on the Super Bowl, focused on the processed food, then it's hard to intervene that. So I think you got to like peel people off, one-on-one conversations, podcasts, and also getting it out to the medical community that this is real, that you really can, reverse most chronic illnesses through diet and lifestyle. You can certainly reverse diabetes, type 2 diabetes, obesity. And I think your podcast, and hopefully people who are listening to this aren't in the choir yet, but they want to join the choir, and they'll be, open to making these healthy decisions.
Yeah, that is kind of the cool thing is like I do think more often than not I am kind of preaching to the choir as you said earlier, but there are more than a handful of emails who come in from people who say that they became plant-based. They started taking care of their health because they heard an episode of the podcast. And that, Doug, is why we do it. I also think that's probably a big reason also why you wrote the Sprout book. Have you heard from people, who have said, man, this book for me, that was just the transformative ticket?
I mean, Chuck, if you think about there's 4 million books on Amazon, the Sprout book hit number 71 of all books on Amazon. And, across my channels, like I was just focusing on going on podcasts and posting occasionally on Instagram. And then someone said, hey, you should really go on TikTok. And I'd never been on TikTok. I downloaded the app. I couldn't get my name. So I was like, oh, I'll be Sprout Whiz on TikTok. And now, I have like 220,000 followers, but I've had more than 50 million views of my sprout based content on TikTok. And I do my best to respond to comments, to DMs, and help people along this journey. But it's just been surprising and delighting how the impact that this little paperback book has had, on me and the readers.
Oh man, that's so cool. That's so cool, man. I'm so thrilled for you. And my final question is just, it's a random curiosity one. I'm wondering if somebody goes to the market and they see something like sprouted grain bread, and then they try to compare that to just a regular loaf of bread. When they get that sprouted grain bread, are they getting a little bit of a nutritional boost there, or is there some marketing magic behind that as well?
I would say that it's very real. The process of sprouting the grains before they bake them in the bread remove some of the lectins and the phytic acid, the enzyme inhibitors, and they're more activated. So I do think that it's better. Specifically and scientifically, I don't know. And I tend not to eat, or I tend not to. I don't eat those products, so I can't tell you. I do, if you think about eating sprouted flax crackers versus baked flax crackers, no comparison, sprouted are better. And like the items that if they can be sprouted, the performance enhancement of them is as a general rule better. To what degree it's marketing, I would have to look into a level of specificity to give you a real opinion.
Man, I love your honesty. We got to leave it right there, Doug, but I would love to get you back on the show at some time. We'll talk more recipes. I'd love to hear from you also about just eating a raw diet overall and get some more of your backstory, because talking to you, I can tell straight away that you are a fascinating individual, my friend.
Well, Chuck, I mean, I am just your reflection, and you are my hero. To go from where you were at 420 pounds, to where you are today, you're probably what, 160?
140, 140.
140. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you are a rock star.
Thank
Like,
you, brother.
it's really like, to deal with food addiction is really, really hard, because you don't have to have sex, right? The sex addiction, you don't have to have sex. You don't have to gamble. You don't have to drink. You don't have to shoot crack, right? Smoke crack, but you do have to eat. So every time you open your mouth, you are triggering an opportunity for a relapse. So your dedication, I just really, really want to acknowledge, like, what you did is incredible. And to the degree that you did it, and I think you're an inspiration. And I'm grateful to have had this contact with you. And I don't know if you're following me on Instagram, but send me a DM so I have your info, and I'm happy to support you any way I can. And I think that if you're eating sprouts, you're going to get nutrient dense food, and you don't have to lose any more weight. Sounds like you're at a perfect weight of 140. The interesting thing is, I'll look at you as like a wild animal in nature, right? And wild animals in nature, they're not underweight, they're not overweight, they're just eating for the nutritional needs that they have, and they're shifting, their biology and their moods and their cravings to be aligned with them living their best life. And you are an example of that, Chuck. It's like,
I thank you, man. That is one of the nicest things anybody has ever said to me. So, thank you so much, man. Like,
okay, well, don't cut it out of the show. Don't leave it in the show.
All right, you hear that, editors? Do not cut that part out. Good to know, man. All right, here's the deal. On TikTok at SproutWiz, Instagram at Doug Evans, and of course, we've got a link to the Sprout book in the episode notes as well. Sure. My friend, this has just been a delight. Thank you so much for spending some time with us.
Hey, my pleasure. And you can sign up for my little newsletter on thesproutbook.com if people are interested.
There it is. And we've got a link to that down below as well. One-stop shop. Doug, you the man. Appreciate you, bud.
Hey, thanks so much, Chuck. I appreciate you.